He slid the check across the table. $5,000 should cover your part. Karen stared at the number, then at the framed logo she helped pay for. The business was worth $13 million, and the office he bragged about? Still under her name. By Friday, the lease was terminated. He called it a payout. She called it a reckoning. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The elevator hummed softly as it climbed past the 20th floor, its mirrored walls reflecting the quiet resolve on Ellie Price's face. She adjusted her navy blazer, smoothed a wrinkle at the cuff. Downtown Dallas glittered beyond the glass, all sharp angles and morning glare. Somewhere in that skyline sat the $13 million deal she had helped build, though you wouldn't know it from her bank account. The elevator chimed. She stepped into the sleek, sterile lobby of her son's tech firm. A young receptionist glanced up, offered a tight, unsure smile, and said, "He's expecting you." Ellie nodded once, kept walking. The floor felt too quiet for a place that had supposedly sold big. No chatter, no movement, just the cold hiss of AC and the hum of server racks behind glass walls. Jason's office sat at the far end, all glass and polished wood. Through it, she could see him already seated behind a massive desk. His hair was sharper now, more sculpted than when he'd first begged her to co-sign that lease 12 years ago. Samantha sat beside him, legs crossed, manicured fingers texting on her phone like she had somewhere better to be. Jason stood as Ellie entered. "Mom," he said, voice all rehearsed warmth, "good of you to come." She walked in slowly, taking in the view behind him. Dallas sprawled outward like a promise that had never been kept. She didn't sit until he gestured, and even then, she chose the seat across from him like a client, not family. Jason reached into a leather folder, withdrew a check, and slid it across the table. "This is for you," he said. Ellie looked down. $5,000. Even the decimal looked smug. Her eyes didn't flicker, but something inside her spine went cold. Jason leaned back in his chair. "It's your share," he said breezily. "You know, for helping out when we started. Thought it was only fair." Ellie didn't touch the check. She remembered the late nights entering payroll in his garage, the unpaid QuickBooks cleanups, the day she signed her name on the lease when the bank called him too risky. She remembered covering the security deposit with her pension check. Jason continued, "It wasn't an easy split, but the buyer loved our model. Tech plus managed services, hot right now. We came out ahead." Samantha looked up at last. "Be grateful, Mom," she said, lips glossy. "Some parents never get anything." Ellie's stomach turned, not from insult. She was long past expecting gratitude, but from the casual, cutting arrogance in her daughter-in-law's tone. Like Ellie should be thrilled for a consolation prize. Jason laced his fingers. "I've got a financial planner who can help you invest it right. It's not about the number, Mom. It's about closure." Closure. She bit down on that word. He had used it like a disinfectant, like it could clean away a dozen years of sacrifice. Ellie reached forward and gently turned the check so it faced Jason again. Not torn, not crumpled, just refused. "Is something wrong?" Jason asked, a hint of irritation blooming behind his practiced calm. She stood, smoothed her blazer again. "Thank you for the offer," she said softly, "but I'd like to think it over." Jason blinked, clearly unused to her having terms. As she turned to leave, Samantha muttered under her breath, "She should be so lucky. $5,000 for a co-signature." Ellie paused in the doorway, her voice light but unshakable. "Some signatures outlive the deal." Neither of them replied. The elevator doors opened, welcoming her back with a quiet ping. Ellie stepped in, her reflection waiting for her inside the mirror. She didn't press the lobby button immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse, pulled out the manila folder she had brought but never opened, and thumbed through the lease agreement with her name at the bottom. Her fingers stopped on a clause. Renewal rights, lessee signed, transferable only with written consent. A slow, sharp smile crept to her lips. Ellie sat at her dining table, the manila folder spread open like a case file. Outside her Lakewood townhouse, cicadas buzzed lazily in the early Texas heat. But inside, the air felt clinical, focused, quiet except for the deliberate sound of paper sliding across wood. She wore her reading glasses now, the heavy kind with no-frills metal frames. The print was small, legal dense, decades-old small. But she knew how to read this language. Most people skimmed leases. Ellie Price didn't skim anything. She moved past the financial clauses, skipped the square footage. Her eyes zeroed in on the section marked Signatories and Guarantors. And there it was. Guarantor. Eleanor M. Price. Primary lessee, Jason Price. Transfer or renewal subject to guarantor's consent. Her pulse didn't race. She'd worked with spreadsheets longer than she'd been married. Instead, a low, methodical satisfaction settled into her chest, the kind of feeling only earned by people who were used to being overlooked, and then remembered. She made a note in the margin with a pencil, not ink, never ink, not on originals. She turned the page. Her name appeared again, bold, unmistakable, co-signer, still active, still binding. Jason hadn't touched it, not once in 12 years. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she landed on a name she hadn't called in years, Lydia Park, property manager. Ellie hesitated only for a moment, then tapped call. It rang twice. Then a crisp voice answered, Lydia Park speaking. Lydia, this is Ellie Price. I believe you and I last spoke back in 2013 when the lease at Commerce Center Tower was being finalized. My son's company, PriceNet. A beat. Then warmth returned. Ellie, yes, of course. I remember your signature was the one that pushed it through. Ellie allowed a small smile. I was hoping you could confirm something for me. Of course. If the lease was never formally transferred or renegotiated, who holds renewal authority? Another pause, but this one was all business. Lydia was flipping through files. Ellie could hear the distant clicking of a keyboard, the soft murmur of an HVAC vent in the background. After a moment, still you. Ellie blinked. Pardon? You never removed yourself from the lease. You're still the guarantor and you hold primary renewal rights. That means, technically, you have control at the end of the current term, which is coming up in about 92 days. Ellie didn't speak for a moment. Her hand rested lightly on the paper. The weight of it suddenly felt very different. Thank you, she said finally. If you'd like to schedule a meeting to go over options, terminate, sublease, reclaim, I'd be happy to walk you through it. I think I'd like that very much. They exchanged pleasantries, but Ellie's mind had already moved. As she ended the call, she looked out the tall windows of her living room, where the sun was slipping behind trees that had outgrown their roots. This house had hosted a baby shower for Samantha once. Jason had promised they'd pay her back for everything she put into the business. She remembered washing the punch bowl alone afterward. While they drove off in a car Ellie had also co-signed. Now she walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet above the fridge, and pulled out a dusty accordion folder filled with their old business statements, credit card bills, payroll stubs with her QuickBooks initials in the margins. She placed the new lease copy on top. With careful precision, she closed the folder, tied its string, and slid it back into the cabinet. Then she turned to her landline, still connected because she liked the permanence of it, and dialed another number from memory. Walt Briggs answered on the second ring, the sound of a sizzling grill and country music humming in the background. You still serve sweet tea this time of night? She asked. For you? It comes with a rib and a story, Walt said. What's going on? Ellie glanced again at the lease. I just remembered something Jason forgot. The next morning, downtown Dallas rose sharp against a pale sky, steel and glass slicing through heat haze. Ellie stepped off the Dart light rail near Clyde Warren Park, heels clicking over the concrete with unhurried confidence. A tote bag hung from her shoulder. Inside, her neatly tabbed lease copy and a yellow legal pad with clean pages waiting to be filled. She entered the Commerce Center Tower lobby, the same building where Jason's company had made its polished little kingdom. But she didn't head to his floor. Instead, she took the elevator to the 11th, where the building's property management offices lived, less glamorous, more functional, No reception desk orchids or designer coffee tables, just white walls, filing cabinets, and phones that rang like they meant business. Lydia Park met her in the hallway with a professional smile and a firm handshake. "Ellie, glad you came." "Still got the same office?" Ellie asked. "Same view. Slightly better furniture," Lydia said with a dry grin, leading her in. They sat at a long conference table. Lydia laid out a laminated floor plan and lease summary while Ellie retrieved her own documents, already marked. "So," Lydia said, "given your position on the lease, you have 3 main options. Terminate the agreement at the end of the term, sublease it to another tenant, or reclaim the space outright and use it yourself, though I assume you don't want to run a tech firm out of here." Ellie gave a quiet, amused snort. "I don't even want to run an email account some days." They both chuckled, but the moment settled into something serious. Lydia leaned in. "Whatever you decide, it's your move. Jason doesn't have the authority to renew or transfer unless you sign off. And by the looks of things, he didn't bother doing his due diligence." "No," Ellie said calmly. "He never bothered much with the paperwork side. That was always my job." Lydia tapped her pen. "We'll need about 30 days' notice for non-renewal. That gives you some runway." Ellie nodded and slipped the documents back into her bag. "I'll let you know soon." By the time she stepped outside, the sun had risen higher, baking the sidewalks and blinding car windshields. She walked across the street and sat under a shaded pavilion at Clyde Warren Park, sipping a cold tea she'd bought from a nearby stand. She was thinking not about revenge, not yet, but about precision, about leverage, about how Jason had always assumed she was safe to ignore, and about Harriet Cole. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to the H's. Harriet had been her colleague once, back in the CPA days before Jason's startup. A business attorney now, cool-headed, no-nonsense, deeply versed in partnership law. She'd helped dozens of small business owners untangle messes just like this, but always from the shadows, where the quiet people worked best. Ellie tapped call. Harriet picked up halfway through the second ring. "Ellie Price. Lord, it's been a while." Ellie smiled. "Too long, but I've got a situation that needs the kind of brain you charge for." "I'm listening." "I think I've got leverage on Jason's office lease," Ellie said, "but I want to do this right. Clean, by the book." Harriet's voice warmed. "Tell you what, I've got a window tomorrow morning at 10. My office is just down the block from where you are. Come in and let's put your son's signature under a microscope." After they hung up, Ellie sat still for a while longer, watching families stroll through the park, kids in matching polos tossing a frisbee near the dog run. Downtown Dallas buzzed around her, but she moved through it like a diver in slow water, focused, controlled, deliberate. Later that evening, she stepped through the back door of Briggs Pit BBQ, where the smell of mesquite smoke greeted her like an old friend. Walt was at the smoker, pulling ribs from the heat with tongs the size of oars. He looked up and grinned. "Brought your thinking face." Ellie sat on the bench beside him, fanning herself with a folded napkin. "I met with the property manager, then called Harriet." "Smart move." He slid a rib onto her plate without asking. "She says I can shut him out clean, legally, quietly." Walt chewed for a moment, nodded. "If you play this right, Elle, he'll sweat harder than brisket on July 4th. Ellie smiled faintly, but her eyes were razor-sharp. Harriet Cole's office was the opposite of Jason's. No glass walls, no flashy minimalist nonsense. Just walnut shelves stacked with thick casebooks, a ticking wall clock, and a desk cluttered with real work. A framed diploma from SMU School of Law hung crooked on the wall. Ellie liked that. It meant Harriet was too busy winning to worry about aesthetics. They sat across from each other at a round table near the window. Harriet wore a charcoal gray blazer over a blue blouse, sleeves rolled up. Her reading glasses were perched on the end of her nose, and she read the lease paperwork like it owed her money. "Solid clause structure," Harriet murmured. "No sunset provisions. Jason never filed a transfer addendum. It's airtight." Ellie nodded. She wasn't there for compliments. Harriet set the lease aside and picked up a clean sheet of legal paper from her printer tray. "I'll draft the notice today. It'll be formal, neutral in tone, no fireworks, just business." I want it filed quietly, Ellie said. No alerts. No copies to Jason until the timing makes sense. Harriet's pen moved briskly, each word a scalpel. It'll go directly to the building manager and leasing office. Certified mail. That's all we need to start the clock. Ellie watched the words appear line by line. There was no drama in the room, no gavel banging, no storm of music swelling like in the movies. Just precision. Just the kind of silence where power lives. Harriet slid the paper across the table and handed Ellie her pen. You ready? Ellie didn't hesitate. She signed her name with a fluid, practiced motion, the way she'd signed hundreds of vendor checks and payroll forms over the years. But this signature felt heavier, like it had roots. It was done. Harriet nodded with approval. The space reverts to your control in 90 days, assuming no new agreement is made, and unless Jason reads his lease renewal terms every night before bed, which I doubt, he won't realize a thing until it's far too late. Ellie exhaled. Not relief, just confirmation. Good. She tucked the signed copy into a leather folio, zipped it shut, and stood. She didn't offer a hug, and Harriet didn't ask for one. They were past sentiment now. This was business. I'll handle the filings, Harriet said. And Ellie? Ellie turned back at the door. You're doing this clean. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Ellie offered a faint smile. I won't. I've been quiet my whole life. Doesn't mean I've been asleep. The sun was dipping by the time Ellie reached Briggs Pit BBQ. Golden light bounced off the smoker's steel sides as Walt wiped his hands on a towel and pushed open the back door for her. You look like someone who just paid off her mortgage early, he said. I did something better, she replied, handing him the leather folio. He peeked inside, then let out a low whistle. So that's the famous stroke of the pen. Ellie nodded. Official as a Texas birth certificate. Walt waved her toward their usual table in the back corner, where the walls were lined with faded photos of pitmasters and Sunday rodeos. He poured her a glass of sweet tea without asking, then slid a fresh rack of ribs between them. You know, he said, cracking a grin, I always thought you had more backbone than your son. Now I've got it in writing. They clinked tea glasses. Ellie took a slow bite of rib, smoky, tender, just the way she liked it. She chewed in silence, savoring the moment. There was no celebration banner, no crowd, just ribs and resolve. Then, carefully, she opened her tote bag and pulled out 3 more envelope copies, filed, dated, stamped, and tucked them into a slim metal lockbox beneath Walt's counter. I want backups, she said. 1 here, 1 at home, 1 at my bank. If Jason tries to get clever, I want this to outlive his excuses. Walt nodded. You thinking long game? Ellie's voice was soft, but firm. I'm thinking legacy. Jason had always preferred to schedule things on his terms, Tuesday mornings, early, when people were still off balance from the weekend and eager to prove something. Ellie knew the game. She'd played it in 1,000 boardrooms long before he ever typed his first pitch deck. She arrived 2 minutes early, calm and polished in a sand-colored blazer and flats that whispered across the marble floor. The receptionist, a new one this time, buzzed her in without much ceremony. Jason's office looked even more manufactured than before. A bowl of untouched oranges sat beside a glass carafe of alkaline water. Framed photos of him and Samantha in places like Napa and Aspen now lined the credenza, curated lifestyle as proof of success. He stood as she entered, too quickly. Mom, he said, the words stretched wide like taffy. Glad you could make time. Sit, please. She sat. Samantha, already perched on the nearby love seat, wore a crisp white blouse that likely cost more than Ellie's entire outfit. She scrolled her phone absently with one perfectly painted nail, pretending disinterest while practically vibrating with anticipation. Jason poured Ellie a glass of water from the carafe and placed it in front of her like a sommelier offering wine. So, he began, clasping his hands together, I wanted to touch base. We've been meaning to sit down anyway, and I figured now's as good a time as any. Ellie lifted the glass, took a slow sip. You figured right. Jason leaned back, slipping into his favorite posture, command casual. We just booked a week in the Amalfi Coast. Samantha needs some R&R after all this chaos. The sale, the handoff, the lawyers, it's been nuts. Samantha piped in without looking up. We might do Dubai over Christmas too, just to reset. Then finally, meeting Ellie's eyes. You should look into something like that. Treat yourself. Maybe a retirement condo near the water? Jason grinned. You know, invest that $5,000 I gave you. Make it grow. You could turn that into 10 with the right fund. Ellie set her glass down gently. I'm sure you'd have a brochure. Jason didn't catch the edge in her tone, or ignored it. Look, I know you feel like you contributed back in the early days, and I appreciate that. We do. We do, Samantha echoed without emotion. But, Jason continued, I had to put everything on the line these last few years. My name, my credit, my work. You saw the hours I kept. Ellie's eyes never left his. I sacrificed a lot, he said, more firmly now, and I just want things to be clear. The company, PriceNet, was my baby. Ellie reached into her leather tote and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No folder, no envelope, just one carefully unfolded page. She slid it across the desk, landing it next to Jason's coffee mug. What's this? He asked, lifting it. His voice was casual, but his fingers stiffened. He scanned the top line, then the next. His lips stopped moving after the fourth. The color in his face began to fade, cheeks first, then the tips of his ears. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again, like a modem trying to reboot. You kept this? He said finally, barely audible. Samantha leaned in to look. What is it? Jason didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the document like it was radioactive. Ellie leaned back in her chair and folded her hands in her lap. It's the notice of non-renewal, filed, stamped, certified. Jason's voice cracked. You had no right. I had every right, Ellie said calmly, because you never removed my name, because you assumed I'd never check, and because you forgot something very important. She picked up her glass again, cool as stone. I read the fine print. Samantha stood up suddenly, like she might argue, but no words came. Ellie rose from her chair slowly. I came here today to give you the courtesy of being the first to know, and because, she added with a small smile, I wanted to see your face when you realized you don't own the ground you're standing on. The call came less than 2 hours after Ellie walked out of Jason's office. She was back in her Lakewood kitchen, cutting up collard greens for dinner, when her phone lit up with his name. She let it ring twice before sliding the screen to answer, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she raised it to her ear. His voice was already sharp. You had no right to go behind my back. Ellie set the knife down without looking up. You mean exercising my legal authority? That wasn't behind your back, Jason. That was under your nose. You blindsided me, he snapped. This isn't how family handles things. She smiled faintly. Family would have remembered who signed the damn lease. There was a pause, just a second, but enough to reveal he had no comeback. Then the fury returned. Look, I don't care what that paper says. We can fix this. Just sign over the renewal rights and I'll make sure you get more than 5,000. Ellie leaned against the counter, perfectly still. I'm not interested in your revised math. You can't possibly want the space? He pushed. You're not going to open a business. No, she said calmly, but I sure as hell know who shouldn't be using it for free. His voice was lower now, but no less angry. This'll get ugly if you keep pushing. Ellie's voice never shifted. Then talk to Harriet. A pause. What? You want a negotiation? You want paperwork changed? You want to pretend your own mother doesn't have a say? Talk to Harriet Cole. I'm sure you remember her. I'm not going through some geriatric lawyer just to keep my office, he exploded. Then you'd better find a new one in 90 days, she said, and hung up. She stood there for a moment in the silence, the line now dead. Her fingers didn't tremble, her heart didn't race. In fact, the only thing Ellie felt was clarity. She stirred the greens, popped a skillet of cornbread into the oven, and packed up a few foil containers for later. By 6, she was on her way to Briggs Pit BBQ, her usual rhythm returning like muscle memory. Walt was outside, sipping sweet tea in a rocking chair on the back patio, watching the last of the sun fade behind a line of pecan trees. He looked up as Ellie approached. "Let me guess, Jason didn't take the news with grace?" Ellie handed him the cornbread container. "He wants me to sign everything over." "Of course he does," Walt said, standing to let her into the kitchen. "Boy's built his whole life on the assumption you'll fold." "I told him to talk to Harriet." Walt whistled low. "Oof, that's colder than my iced tea." She smiled. "She's better equipped for tantrums than I am." They sat down to dinner in the back room. Ribs, greens, Ellie's cornbread, and silence so comfortable it didn't need filling. Walt ate like someone who trusted his food. Ellie ate like someone who'd earned the peace of this moment. She didn't check her phone until she got home. It was waiting. A voicemail from Samantha. Ellie stared at it for a long second before pressing play. The recording clicked on, Samantha's voice laced with venom dressed as elegance. "Ellie, I don't know what kind of power trip you think you're on, but this little game you're playing? It's toxic. Jason's built everything from scratch and you're trying to rip it away for some twisted sense of control. You had your time. Step aside and stop pretending you're still relevant." Ellie didn't flinch. She played the message twice, then saved it. Without a word, she opened the bottom drawer of her bedroom dresser, pulled out a fresh notebook, and wrote down the date, time, and transcript by hand. She titled the page, "Attempts to Intimidate, Week 1. The conference room inside Harriet Cole's law office didn't try to impress. No skyline view, no espresso machine, no art. Just gray walls, clean glass, and an air of sharpened restraint. Harriet believed in letting the paper do the talking. Jason had arrived 5 minutes early, dragging his attorney behind him, a polished man with slicked-back hair and a litigator's voice trained to sound amused, even when cornered. Jason wore a blazer too stiff for his usual bravado. He kept adjusting the cuffs. Harriet sat alone on her side of the table, papers in front of her, reading glasses resting halfway down her nose. Her stillness had weight. She didn't rise when they entered. "You must be Daniel Cross," she said, not offering a handshake. "I am," the lawyer said, smiling thinly. "Here to resolve a misunderstanding. Our client believes there's been some confusion over the lease authority." Harriet didn't blink. "There's no confusion, just paperwork." Jason leaned forward. "She was just a co-signer. She helped me get the lease approved back then, but she wasn't involved in day-to-day operations. She was never an owner, just support." "She also covered your security deposit," Harriet said, flipping a page, "and signed as guarantor and co-lessee." Jason waved a hand, scoffing. "But I built the business. I took the risk. She's holding this lease hostage for personal reasons." "You mean legal reasons?" Harriet corrected. Cross cleared his throat. "Let's not get semantic. What matters is intent. We believe Ms. Price never expected to enforce control." "Intent?" Harriet's voice finally lifted, not loud, just steel-lined. "Let me be clear, Mr. Cross. This is not a probate dispute. We're not divining the feelings of a ghost. Miss Price is alive, alert, and well within her rights." She slid a copy of the lease across the table. Paragraph 11, subsection C. Renewal authority resides solely with the guarantor unless formally transferred, which it was not. Jason shifted in his chair, eyes darting over the text. "You can't just freeze me out of my own company's office. That's insane." Harriet smiled politely, never showing her teeth. "Then perhaps you should have read the documents you signed." Jason turned red, not flush pink, but blotchy, uneven. His lawyer placed a calming hand on his shoulder, but it was clear the dynamic had turned. Harriet tapped the lease with her pen. "I have certified mailing records for the non-renewal notice. I have timestamps. I have building management acknowledgments. And I have no legal obligation to negotiate with you." Cross was already backing down. "Well, this may have been more entrenched than we were led to believe. Perhaps a formal offer might still be on the table." "It's not," Harriet said, cutting him off gently, as if excusing a child from the dinner table. Jason sat back hard in his chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He didn't speak again. The meeting ended without fanfare. Harriet stood first, gathered her materials in a slow, deliberate motion, and nodded once toward the door. Jason left without looking at her. Ellie was waiting in the reception area. She rose as Harriet approached. "Well?" Ellie asked. Harriet adjusted her glasses. His lawyer blinked before he even sat down. Ellie's smile was brief, quiet. "I knew he would." They walked out together, Harriet holding the door for her like they were leaving a church service instead of a legal showdown. At the curb, Harriet paused. "You did the work. You made this possible. I just put the punctuation on it." Ellie turned toward her, soft but sure. "You did more than that." She opened her purse and pulled out a neatly folded slip of yellow notepad paper, handwritten bullet points and quotes from Jason's previous calls. She placed it in Harriet's hand. "Next time he tries to spin a new narrative," Ellie said, "I want us 2 steps ahead." Harriet tucked the note into her folder, nodded once. "Consider it handled." Ellie woke to 37 notifications. Texts, voicemails, missed calls, and social media screenshots sent by cousins she hadn't spoken to in years. All of them asking some version of the same question. "What happened between you and Jason?" Her son had always curated his online image with the precision of a political campaign. Sunsets, startup wins, anniversary selfies with Samantha. Now, for the first time, his feed was radio silent. But his employees weren't. One post from an anonymous burner account read, "Can't believe we might lose our office because the CEO's mom wants revenge. Wild." Another, "Guess signing paperwork still matters. But you watch your leases." She didn't respond, didn't even open the group threads. She simply powered the phone off, set it face down on the kitchen counter, and poured herself a cup of black coffee. It wasn't fear she felt. It was exposure. The kind of light that comes not from cameras, but from the way people squint at you in a grocery aisle, like you've become a headline instead of a human. She needed to breathe air that wasn't piped through screens. By mid-morning, she was out at White Rock Lake, walking the gravel trail that wrapped around the water's edge. The air was thick with August heat, but a breeze came off the lake, soft and welcome. She passed runners, dog walkers, a father teaching his daughter to cast a fishing line. None of them knew who she was. None of them cared. She let that truth settle into her shoulders like a shawl. Her phone stayed in her pocket the entire time. That afternoon, Ellie stopped by Briggs Pit BBQ, where Walt was slicing brisket at the side counter. He raised an eyebrow when he saw her. "You look like you've been baptized in fire and came out steam-cleaned." Ellie leaned against the counter. "Jason's people are posting online, painting me as some kind of crazy old woman trying to ruin a company." Walt didn't miss a beat. "Let 'em. Silence is seasoning. Let it marinate long enough, they'll taste the truth." She gave him a look. Half smile, half sigh. "I'm not worried about strangers." "No," he said, sliding her a tray without asking what she wanted. "You're worried about people who should have known better." Back home, she finally turned her phone back on. A message blinked from Lydia. "FYI, if you enforce the non-renewal, Jason's team will need to vacate entirely. We can't extend temporary occupancy under this lease. Let me know your call." Ellie stared at the screen for a full minute, then typed back, "Understood. Proceed accordingly." Not 5 minutes later, a second message came through. "Also, employees are starting to talk, words spreading internally. You may get more attention than expected." Ellie typed her reply carefully. "They'll adapt. They always do." As dusk settled in, Ellie sat on her back patio, a legal pad balanced on her lap, untouched. The cicadas hummed in the trees. A mockingbird dove for a low-hanging feeder. Then came the chime. An email from Harriet, subject line, status confirmation. Ellie opened it. "Ellie, everything's clean. The building confirmed receipt. Legal confirms no breach. Your position is ironclad. He can yell, stall, posture, but he can't unwind what's already done. Let me know if you want to pursue next steps regarding the incoming tenant offers. Harriet." Ellie read it twice, then let the phone rest on the arm of the chair. She didn't need to reply yet. She just sat there, watching the last orange streaks of sun dissolve behind the rooftops of Lakewood, the sky stretching open like something earned. The pounding on Ellie's front door came just after 8 a.m., Angry, urgent, unmistakably Jason. She didn't flinch. She finished buttering her toast, placed it neatly on a plate, and carried it to the front room. Only then did she open the door. Jason stood on the porch, eyes bloodshot, shirt untucked, and breathing hard like he'd jogged there instead of driven. Samantha stood behind him, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding everything except her disgust. "You can't do this!" Jason barked, pushing past her into the house. "You can't take my company's office!" Ellie closed the door behind him with slow care. "It was never your company alone. And that space? You built it on my signature." "Don't start with the legal gymnastics," he snapped. "This isn't a court. This is our family." Samantha muttered from behind her glasses. "Some family." Jason pulled a folded document from his jacket, waved it like a threat. "You know how this looks? You look petty, vindictive. You're torching everything I worked for." Ellie reached calmly into the side drawer of the entryway table and pulled out her own envelope. It was already labeled and sealed. She handed it to him. He stared at it, confused. "That's your formal lease termination notice. From the building. Effective in 45 business days. Signed, processed, and confirmed." Jason's hand tightened around the paper, crumpling the top corner. "You're actually going through with this," he said quietly. Ellie looked at him, not cold, but clear. "I'm not going through with anything. I already did." His jaw locked. "You think you're so clever. You're just bitter because we didn't cut you in." "No," Ellie said, her voice soft but razor-sharp. "I'm just done being erased." Jason stood still for a long second, his mouth twitching like he wanted to argue but couldn't find words sharp enough. Then, like a match-catching flame, he spun on his heel. "Let's go," he barked at Samantha. But she didn't move. She was staring at Ellie. "You really think you're coming out of this looking noble?" Samantha said, arms still crossed. "Everyone's talking. You're going to die alone in this house with your filing cabinet full of spite." Ellie didn't blink. "Then I'll die with my name on the door." Samantha scoffed, turned, and walked out without another word. Jason followed, slamming the front door so hard the picture frame by the hallway rattled. Ellie stood there a moment longer. Then she reached down and straightened the frame. She was halfway through her coffee when the phone rang. Lydia Park. Ellie answered on the second ring. "Just wanted to update you on something," Lydia said, tone brisk. "Since word of the lease turnover got around, I've had a handful of firms reach out. Legal, tech, architecture, good names, all serious." Ellie sat forward, quiet. "One of them's offering over market rate," Lydia added. 12-year lease, no build-out needed." Ellie exhaled slowly. Lydia continued. "None of them want to move in quietly either. One even asked if they could get signage rights." Ellie let the silence stretch just long enough to feel weighty. "Let's schedule some walkthroughs." "I thought you'd say that." They hung up. Ellie leaned back, staring out the front window at the crepe myrtle blooming against her fence. It was the same one Jason had helped plant the summer before his company took off, back when he still called her after midnight because he couldn't figure out payroll tax rates. Now he had walked through her front door like it was enemy territory. She took another sip of coffee and opened her notepad. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "Offers, incoming, Lydia." Then underneath it, in smaller letters, "Jason's name may be on the tech, but the address is mine." Late morning sunlight filtered through the dining room blinds as Ellie sat at the head of the table, a mug of Earl Grey cooling beside her elbow, and 3 neatly prepared folders fanned out before her. Each bore a tab with a name handwritten in crisp block letters: Beacon Compliance, North 7 Architects, and Beasley and Drake, LLP. Lydia had sent finalist proposals 2 days earlier, and Ellie had read through each one with the same attention she used to give balance sheets during audit season, line by line, clause by clause, highlight by highlight. She appreciated the energy behind Beacon Compliance. They were young, growing fast, flush with investor capital, and eager to move into a prime downtown location. But their offer came with a laundry list of build-out requirements and optional expansion clauses that felt just unstable enough to trigger Ellie's old accountant instincts. North 7 Architects were clean, efficient, design savvy. Their portfolio was impressive, and their rent proposal was respectable. But something about their 3-year term with rolling renewals made her hesitate. Jason had built his empire on revolving timelines and exit strategies. Ellie wasn't interested in temporary tenants. It was the final proposal, the law firm, that made her stop and reread the cover letter 3 times. Beasley and Drake, LLP, had been founded nearly 3 decades earlier and had expanded without overextending. Their terms were quiet, firm, and clear. 12-year lease, no alterations to the floor plan, full rent 6 months up front. The letter was signed in pen by Ruth Beasley herself, and it began with one line that struck Ellie like a bell in her chest. "We don't take space, we earn it." That afternoon, Harriet came by to review the paperwork over lemon scones, and the kind of legal pad Ellie hadn't touched in years, but kept around out of habit. Harriet wore her usual no-nonsense blazer and flats, her hair pulled back into a knot that looked more like a war strategy than a hairstyle. After scanning each proposal again, Harriet pointed to the Beasley folder. "That one's going to last. Ruth's sharp as ever, and she's built her team like a bench, not a pedestal. No one's running off to be the next startup unicorn." Ellie nodded, fingers resting lightly on the manila edge. "I want tenants who value staying power, not flash." "You'd be signing your name beside hers," Harriet said. "You want that signature on your building? Because that's what this is now, your building." Ellie didn't hesitate. She took the lease, flipped to the last page, and signed. The building's leasing office sent confirmation 2 days later. Beasley and Drake LLP had scheduled move-in orientation for the first Friday after Jason's lease officially ended. Lydia's note was brief, matter-of-fact, and enclosed in it was a copy of the new signage request. The law firm had asked for full directory naming rights. Ellie read the document slowly, then printed out the signage form and slipped it into a folder labeled Legacy 2025. She was filing it away when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. It didn't take long before news of the finalized lease reached Jason. He didn't hear it from Ellie or Harriet. Instead, it came from his own office manager, who had received the transition email from building operations. According to Lydia, who recounted the entire scene with dry amusement, Jason had shown up at the building, tried to access the 23rd floor without clearance, and had to be physically walked out by security. He didn't yell, he seethed. That evening, Ellie brought a still warm pan of cornbread to Briggs Pit BBQ, where Walt was closing up early for a family reunion in the hill country. He met her out back with a folding chair, 2 glasses of sweet tea, and that same easy way of settling into silence without needing permission. "I heard about the lease," he said after a while, rocking slightly on the legs of his chair. "Beasley's a good name." "She won't just rent it," Ellie replied. "She'll respect it." Walt smiled, lifted his glass, and nodded toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip past the rooftops. "That's not just a win, Elle, that's poetic." They clinked glasses, and for a while, said nothing at all. Later that night, in her quiet Lakewood townhouse, Ellie opened an email from Lydia with the subject line, "Lobby plaque disposition." The message was short. "The original tenant signage has been removed. Do you want to store it, discard it, or retrieve it personally?" Ellie clicked reply and typed 4 words. "I'll pick it up." The envelope was thick and printed with a law firm's return address Ellie didn't recognize. It arrived midweek, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a credit card promotion, delivered by a postal worker who gave her a tight nod and moved on without fanfare. Ellie stood in the kitchen beneath the soft hum of the ceiling fan as she slit the envelope open with the same letter opener she had used for years. Brass-handled, no nonsense. Inside was a formal complaint, Jason's name in bold, followed by 3 pages of legal posturing that read more like performance than prosecution. It was filed under breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation of intent, and, most absurdly, emotional interference with business continuity. She read every word, carefully and without alarm. Then she called Harriet. When Ellie arrived at Harriet's office the next morning, she found her already mid-call, flipping through a printout of the same complaint with the phone wedged between shoulder and cheek. Her expression was dry, clinical. There was no urgency in the air, Just paperwork. Thanks, Judge, Harriet said coolly before hanging up. He filed in small claims court, which doesn't have jurisdiction over commercial property disputes, and he filed it himself, which is the legal equivalent of bringing a butter knife to a shootout. Ellie set her bag down and slid into the chair across from her. He really thought this would scare me. He thought it would make you settle, Harriet corrected, which is what people try when they're out of legal ground and clinging to ego. It took Harriet less than 30 minutes to prepare the response. She included lease documentation, filing timestamps, and the certified notices from Lydia's office. Every page was double-checked, labeled, and tucked into a soft blue folder. When she handed it across the table, Ellie held it for a long second, appreciating the weight of it. He's going to be humiliated, isn't he? Harriet gave a small, satisfied nod. Legally, economically, and, if I had to guess, socially. The hearing was scheduled on a Monday morning, inside a courtroom so bland it looked like it had been carved out of beige drywall. Jason arrived in a fitted navy suit, trying to look composed but failing to hide the sweat along his collar. His expression shifted the moment Harriet entered the room. Brief panic replaced by forced confidence. The judge barely looked at Jason's complaint before glancing at Harriet's response. Ms. Price, the judge said, addressing Ellie directly, you are under no obligation to speak. The documentation provided by your counsel is sufficient. Ellie nodded once, remaining seated. Jason attempted to stand, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Mr. Price, this court does not handle commercial lease disputes of this nature. Furthermore, your filing lacks standing and fails to meet basic criteria for damages. Jason opened his mouth again. The judge didn't look up. You are ordered to pay opposing counsel's fees and associated administrative costs. Harriet gave a polite nod, but Ellie could see it in her eyes. The kind of victory that didn't require celebration because it had always been inevitable. Jason stormed out of the courtroom without looking at either of them. A week later, Ellie received a reimbursement check in the mail from the county clerk's office, Jason's signature printed in tiny, reluctant ink at the bottom corner. She took it to her local credit union on Gaston Avenue, where the teller, an older woman with bright red lipstick and a lavender cardigan, processed the deposit with a warm smile. Anything special about this one? She asked, noting the legal memo line. Ellie returned the smile gently. Just a small return on a long investment. She tucked the receipt into her purse, then stopped by Briggs Pit BBQ for a slice of pecan pie to go. The air smelled of smoked meat and sweet tea, and she let it wrap around her like armor. That evening, she checked her social media account, not out of habit, but because Walt had texted her a heads up. Samantha had unfriended her, and not just her. Ellie counted at least 8 mutual relatives who had vanished from her feed. Quiet digital pruning, passive-aggressive politics dressed up as boundary setting. She sat at her desk, the window behind her spilling golden dusk onto the hardwood floor. The framed lease agreement sat just to her right, and the new tenant's signage application was paperclipped neatly above it. She didn't reach for her keyboard. She didn't comment or message or mourn. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote one clean sentence on a fresh page. They walked out quietly. The door didn't need to slam. The office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books, Harriet's idea of ambiance, not decoration. Her desk was piled high with red folders and case summaries, but everything had a kind of ordered chaos to it. The desk was lived in, like its owner, but never careless. Ellie sat across from her, spine straight, ankles crossed, her handbag resting at her feet. She wore a charcoal blazer and her wedding ring, still, though she hadn't said his name aloud in years. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer needed to be said. She didn't bring a notepad this time, just herself. Harriet reviewed the existing estate plan on her computer screen with a quiet, measured breath. Last update was 2014, she said without judgment. Jason and Samantha were both named primary beneficiaries with a clause for future grandchildren. Ellie nodded. It's time for a rewrite. Harriet turned from the screen. Tell me what you want. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was precision. Ellie chose her words the way she chose her battles, slowly but with finality. Remove Jason entirely. No disbursements, no clauses, no conditions. Harriet didn't blink. She simply opened a blank document and began typing. Ellie continued. The bulk, 80%, goes to the Lakewood Women's College Endowment. Create a named fund. Annual scholarships for girls in accounting, finance, or law. Needs-based only. No essay fluff. Got it, Harriet murmured. 10% to Briggs Baptist Community Fund. Walt's church. He won't ask, but they could use it. And the last 10? Harriet asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Ellie smiled. Not wide, but true. To Walt. For his loyalty. For never asking why I kept so quiet for so long. Harriet typed without a single pause, her expression softening as she worked. The keys clicked with quiet finality. When she finished, she looked up. Are you sure? I've never been more. Harriet turned the monitor slightly so Ellie could review the language. She read every word, careful and exact, nodding only when the structure and tone matched the steel in her bones. Then, slowly, she reached for the signature line. She signed in steady ink. Not with anger, not even with closure, but with authority. They left the office together just past sunset. The glass buildings around Clyde Warren Park had begun to glow in blue and gold reflections, and the sidewalks glistened faintly from an earlier drizzle that had long since dried from the trees. The street lamps buzzed overhead, casting their amber glow over parked cars and concrete planters filled with native grass. Ellie paused just outside the building and looked up. Dallas had changed so much since she first moved here, but the smell of wet pavement after a hot day still lingered in the same way. Clean. Real. Unapologetic. I'll file everything in the morning, Harriet said gently, and I'll make sure there's no way it gets challenged. I'll lock it up tighter than Jason's ego. Ellie gave a soft laugh. He never thought he'd be left out of something permanent. Harriet didn't respond to that because it didn't need answering. After a beat, Ellie turned to her friend. You want to know what broke me? It wasn't the money. Wasn't even the arrogance. Harriet waited. It was the moment I realized my son didn't just forget what I gave him. He thought he could erase it, like I was temporary. The sound of a passing dart train rumbled in the distance. Somewhere nearby, a jazz trio started up on a patio bar, the notes dancing faint and far. I'm not temporary, Ellie said. No, Harriet agreed. You're precedent. Ellie walked the 2 blocks to her car with no need to rush. The city air had cooled, crisp and fragrant with crepe myrtle blooms. She opened the door, tossed her purse into the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For the first time in years, there was nothing pressing to follow up on, no fire to put out, no paper trail to chase. She didn't feel victorious. She felt free. The call came from Walt. Not a text, not a voicemail, just the clean ring of a landline at 8:23 a.m., the hour reserved for only a few people in Ellie's world. She answered without hesitation, tea still steeping on the counter. You sitting down? Walt's voice came through low, not dramatic, but measured, like someone who already knew the impact but didn't want to rush the landing. Ellie settled into the kitchen chair. Go ahead. I heard it from a guy I know in the DA's office, Walt said. Samantha filed something against Jason. Ellie blinked once. Filed what? Fraud. Financial misconduct. Apparently she found out he'd moved a whole chunk of investor money into a side account. Her name's on the board, so now she's trying to jump ship before it sinks. Ellie didn't speak for a long moment. She looked down at her teacup, the tag floating gently in the steam. Then she asked, Was it recent? Filed last Friday. Quiet for now, but it won't stay that way. Ellie exhaled, long and even. Not in surprise, not in glee, just inevitability. Thanks for telling me, she said. Figured you'd want to know before it hits the headlines. They hung up, and Ellie moved through the house without hurry. She folded a load of laundry, watered the plants by the window, took her tea onto the back porch and let the warmth bleed through her hands. By late afternoon, the second call came. Jason. His name flashed across her screen like a memory trying too hard to be forgiven. She didn't answer right away. Let it ring. Let him wait. Then finally, curiosity or something gentler, she picked up. His voice came through dry and cracked, like someone trying to hold a wall steady that had already crumbled beneath them. "Mom," he said. Ellie said nothing. "I know you heard. About Samantha. About the money. I didn't know she'd go that far." Still, Ellie waited. Let him reveal who he was without interruption. "I messed up," he said. "I took some things I shouldn't have, tried to fix them before anyone noticed. But she went nuclear." He paused again. "I need help," Jason said finally. "I don't know what to do. I don't have a lawyer anymore. I barely have an accountant. Everything's falling apart." Ellie's voice, when it came, was level, measured. "You remember when I used to do payroll for you? Back in the early days?" Jason was silent. "You'd tell me to be fast but invisible, to handle the back end so you could be the face." A breath. "Not sharp, not cruel." "I was always the back end, Jason, but you forgot the front end collapses without it. Please," he whispered. "You're still my mother." "Yes," she said quietly, "but you're not my responsibility." And then, without anger or theatrics, she ended the call. She didn't cry, she didn't shake. She just went to her file cabinet, pulled out the new lease ledger, and began recording the first official rent deposit from Beasley and Drake LLP. The new tenants had moved in 3 days earlier. Ellie didn't go in person, she didn't need to, but Lydia sent photos, freshly painted walls, desks being assembled, Ruth Beasley herself placing a framed law degree on the newly claimed corner office. The directory downstairs now read, Beasley and Drake LLP, formerly PriceNet. Lydia's caption had been short, "Your name isn't on the door, but your signature built the floor beneath it." Later that week, Ellie wrote her first scholarship check. The Lakewood Women's College Endowment sent a formal letter in return, signed by the dean, with a small handwritten note. "Our first recipient is a Latina first-gen freshman studying business law." She cried when we told her. Ellie tucked the letter into her desk drawer, just behind the folder marked Legacy, 2025. That evening, she was trimming basil in the kitchen when her phone buzzed again. "Lydia." Ellie answered with a smile already forming. "You won't believe what turned up during final storage cleanup," Lydia said. "What now?" "The old PriceNet plaque, from outside Jason's office. Brass. Looks expensive." Ellie's hands stilled over the cutting board. "Do you want it?" Lydia asked. Ellie looked out the window, where the sky had turned a bruised lavender above the rooftops. She didn't answer right away. Then, with the barest trace of a smile curling her mouth, she said, "Hold on to it for me. I might have a use for it yet." The brass plaque sat on Lydia's desk like a relic from a forgotten century. Ellie hadn't seen it up close in years, not since the day Jason insisted on unveiling it like a milestone, a symbol of all he'd built. Back then he'd made a whole show of it, ribbon cutting, catered charcuterie, handshakes with minor local officials, a thin layer of ambition polished until it gleamed. Now, the name PriceNet Technologies was still etched into the surface in all caps serif, weighty and smug, but time hadn't been kind to it. A faint scratch crossed the P, and the gold had dulled around the edges. What once screamed permanence now looked a little embarrassed to still exist. Ellie ran her fingers across the cool metal, then glanced at Lydia. "You sure this isn't trash?" Lydia smiled. "Not if it still makes you think." Ellie nodded once. "I'll take it." Later that afternoon, 2 building staffers helped load the plaque into the back seat of her sedan, wrapped in moving blankets and sealed with painter's tape. It wasn't heavy, just awkward. Like most things left behind by men who believed the world owed them a monument. Ellie drove east toward Briggs Pit BBQ, letting traffic melt behind her. The sun rode high, throwing long shadows over the rows of auto shops and corner laundromats she passed along the way. When she arrived, Walt was standing out back with a bucket of mesquite chips in one hand and a damp towel slung over his shoulder. He looked up as she pulled into the gravel lot, then raised an eyebrow as the car door opened and the gleam of brass caught the light. "You didn't?" Ellie popped the trunk. "I did." Walt chuckled, walking over. "You brought me the ghost of PriceNet?" She grinned. "I figured you had wall space." They lugged the plaque inside together, moving past the regulars, sipping iced tea and the aroma of smoked ribs rolling off the back kitchen. In the corner of the back room, just above the window to the pit, a section of wall had long stood empty, just brick, dusty and honest. Walt held the plaque at arm's length, squinting. I mount this thing here, it becomes folk art. Ellie shrugged. You've always been a curator of truth. They hung it before the evening crowd rolled in. No ceremony, no photos, just 4 bolts and a well-placed step stool. By dinner time, the plaque gleamed quietly over the smoker window, out of place, out of context, and somehow perfect. Customers noticed. They pointed. One man laughed loud enough to startle his own toddler. Wait, he said, gesturing with a brisket-slicked fork. Is that the Jason Price? The tech guy? What's his name doing in a barbecue joint? Walt grinned. Long story, short ending. The crowd ate it up. A few even posed for selfies beneath the plaque, as if it were some ironic badge of caution or karmic punchline. It became a fixture almost overnight, another thing that made Briggs Pit BBQ feel like a living scrapbook of real stories, not just a place to eat. Ellie stood at the counter as the last customers filed out that night, watching the plaque glow faintly under the neon beer signs. She didn't feel petty. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt accurate. Walt came up beside her, wiping his hands on his apron. Can't lie, he said. It brings a strange peace to the place. She gave a small smile. He always wanted to be remembered. Walt looked at her for a long moment. Well, now he is, just not how he planned. Later that night, Ellie sat in her quiet kitchen, the lights low, the crickets chirping just outside the screen door. A check from Beasley and Drake sat folded neatly in her mail tray. This month's rent, already earmarked for next year's scholarship fund. The house was still, humming with the kind of silence that didn't demand anything of her. She poured herself a glass of red wine. No phone nearby, no headlines open, just her. Just the sound of a woman no longer carrying someone else's name on her back. And out there, in a barbecue joint on the edge of Dallas, a plaque gleamed under soft lights, like a story retold one last time, the way it should have been told from the beginning. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains in Ellie's upstairs office, laying soft gold across the floorboards and the corner bookshelf that still held her old ledger binders, faded banker's boxes, and a ceramic mug full of pens that didn't all work anymore. She sat at the desk she'd moved upstairs after retirement. Not quite a command post, not quite a sanctuary, just a place where she could think without interruption. A place that still smelled faintly of eucalyptus oil and printer paper. Her laptop screen glowed with a familiar monthly notification. Lease deposit received. ACH confirmed. The number didn't shock her anymore, but it still made her pause. 12 years. 12 full years of income, handed over without hesitation by a law firm that paid on time, didn't ask for favors, and never once called her mom. Ellie clicked over to her personal finance tracker, logged the deposit with its standard category tag, Legacy Fund. Then she opened a blank page and began to write. The second scholarship check was larger than the first, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She filled in the name carefully, hands steady. Beneath the amount, she wrote a note in the memo line. For whoever comes next and refuses to shrink. She signed it, tore the check from the book, and slipped it into an envelope already addressed to Lakewood Women's College. No hesitation, no need to double-check. Just momentum, the kind that came from surviving the long game and still having enough breath left to shape what came after. At dusk, Ellie pulled into the parking lot behind Briggs Pit BBQ, her usual spot waiting like it always did. She stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her flats, and caught the now familiar scent of hickory smoke laced with sweet onion and summer heat. Walt stood at the smoker window, backlit by the amber light inside, apron dusted with cornbread flour, a glass of sweet tea already waiting on the ledge beside him. "You came hungry?" he asked as she approached. "I came ready," she replied. They sat outside, on the picnic bench behind the pit wall, plates of brisket and slaw between them, cicadas buzzing just beyond the chain-link fence. Walt poured another round of tea, then tipped his head toward the horizon. "You seen the skyline lately?" he asked. She turned. Dallas shimmered in the distance, buildings lit up like constellations, the glass towers blinking against the last vestiges of sun. It didn't look cold from here. It didn't look like ambition. It looked earned. Ellie breathed it in slowly. "No one up there knows my name," she said, "and somehow that feels like power." Walt chuckled, leaning back on the bench. "Funny how that works." A young couple walked past, one of them pointing through the back window into the restaurant. They were laughing. Ellie didn't need to ask why. She already knew they were looking at the plaque. Walt followed her gaze. "You think that thing's gonna haunt me forever?" "No," Ellie said, smiling. "I think it'll remind people to read the fine print." They ate until the plates were nearly clean, the tea gone warm in their cups. There was no rush. There was nothing waiting on the other end of the meal. No email to answer, no fire to smother. Only time, unclaimed and fully hers. When the air cooled enough to make her pull her cardigan tighter, Ellie stood, dropped her napkin onto the plate, and stretched like someone who hadn't carried a burden in weeks. "You good?" Walt asked, still seated. She looked down at him, the glow of the pit fire flickering against her face. "I'm better than good," she said. "I'm whole." Walt nodded, then raised his tea glass for a quiet final toast. "To the long road." Ellie clinked his glass with her own. "To the right end." Later that night, back in her townhouse, Ellie placed the scholarship check on her hallway table, right next to the first one, framed in a simple brass frame she hadn't bothered to hang. The second would go up beside it eventually, maybe more. She didn't write a caption. She didn't add a quote. But in her notebook, beneath a header she'd circled twice, she wrote the line that had anchored all of it, the one no one had given her permission to write, but she wrote anyway. "Some shares aren't given, they're claimed."